Play Sky News.
From the Sky News Centre at 7.
Now that you're up to date, we can go into a bit more detail.
Things can change incredibly quickly.
Taken by surprise.
Have you ever known a moment like this in British politics before? Yes. Cheers.
We'll start with breaking news.
Let's get the latest on the ground.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better.
Well, this is Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview. A first look at what is on the front pages. First, though, a reminder of our top stories this evening. People seeking to end their own lives would have to self-administer the necessary drugs, according to details of the new assisted dying bill due to be published in Parliament tomorrow. The Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, is under pressure to resign over what he knew about a priest who abused as many as 130 boys and young men over the course of 5 decades. And the Kremlin has denied Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin spoke in a phone call last week, with US President-elect urging the Russian leader not to escalate the war in Ukraine. Well, hello there, you're watching the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. Time then to see what's making the headlines with the political editors of The Sun and The Guardian, Harry Cole and Pippa Crerear. Welcome to both of you. So let's check out the front pages then, shall we? Starting with the Daily Mail. It writes of the calls for the Archbishop of Canterbury to quit after a report alleged he failed to act on abuse within the Church of England. The Telegraph looks at this story too, saying that the pressure is mounting on Justin Welby. The Metro also leads on the calls for the Archbishop to go. The Prime Minister's visit to France is on the front of the Financial Times, as EU countries are expected to spend billions more on defence after Trump's victory. The Eye writes of a potential hike in water bills after the Water Minister, Emma Hardy, said money was needed to repair Britain's crumbling infrastructure. Gary Lineker is on the front of The Sun after he announced his retirement from Match of the Day. The Guardian reports on the assisted dying bill, writing that it revealed strict safeguards on protecting patients. And the Daily Star leads on the Premier League referee David Coote, suspended after video appears to show him insulting Liverpool FC Jurgen Klopp. A reminder, by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you listen to our guests. So let's head straight to Harry Cole and Pippa Crerear. A couple of stories dominating, has to be said, one of which is the Archbishop of Canterbury. And is the church turning on itself, effectively? Pippa, can he survive this, and what is the allegation?
Well, it looks very difficult for him tonight, because this is an allegation about a man called John Smith, who was involved in serious and multiple examples of abuse of boys when he was running Christian children's camps in the 1970s and 80s. And it turns out that there's a report commissioned by the church last week which established that Justin Welby was a volunteer as a much younger man, obviously, at those camps. And it concluded that it was unlikely that, while he perhaps didn't know the gravity of the crimes that were being perpetrated, they thought he would most likely have at least heard, rumours, or it was unlikely that he was completely unaware. But, there's a world where you can think, well, maybe he wasn't aware at that time. It's a long time ago. There was a culture of cover-up in the church over, or in institutions generally, over abuse like this. But where really the problem deepens for him is that in 2013, one of these victims of abuse came forward to the church. And, of course, Justin Welby was Archbishop of Canterbury at that time, and by then, and no real action was taken. And subsequently, John Smith went off to Zimbabwe, where he's now dead. He died in 2018, but where he faced charges of manslaughter for a 16-year-old boy at one of these camps. The case was dismissed, but he relocated to South Africa, where he was removed as the leader of his local church amid allegations of his behaviour. So this behaviour clearly continued, and at no time did the church refer it to the police back in 2013. I think by that point, that it was pretty well known that the Catholic Church had a history of cover-up and the magnitude of the repercussions of the sort of the institutional abuse that took place in the Catholic Church is well known. But there were already examples of the Church of England covering up its history of abuse. And his instinct, Justin Welby, the allegation seems to be that his instinct was to hope that this would all go away, not least because this individual had moved abroad. And that survivors would give up their fight for the truth, which is, you know, ultimately...
I suppose the balance is, was there a cover-up, or was there, as he suggested, a failure to energetically inquire further, effectively? And are people out to get him for other reasons? For example, his stance on, you know, lesbian and gay rights, for example, or even, bizarrely, you know, his very outspoken views on the Rwanda policy. I mean, there's reasons why people are against him separately.
I think that's what his defenders would say this was about. But what it comes down to is, look who is saying this. This isn't coming from outside of the church, it's coming from inside the church. We have 7,000 members. 7,000 members of the Church of England now signed this petition saying he's got to go. That petition was started by the Synod, essentially the Parliament of the Church of England.
Or three people, yes, who were supposed to represent different parts of the church in order to counter those allegations that it's a specific group.
Gaining thousands of signatures by the hour. You've got the Bishop of Newcastle, the first bishop to put this head above the parapet and say he has to go. It feels to me like it's kind of reaching a sort of critical mass. We see these things, you know, a lot where it just looks quite obvious. As soon as that report came out, I think he was done. Obviously, the word unlikely is doing a lot of heavy lifting there. That's about as close as I think you can get to calling someone a liar in a quite a sort of soft way, but in the way that these internal inquiries often don't want to say they don't want to say it explicitly, but to suggest that the Archbishop of Canterbury is unlikely that his version of events is credible is about as damning as it gets for one of these reports. So I think he didn't bother tonight, and I think he'll probably be the last person that realises it. But the way it feels from looking at this from the outside is that we're reaching that moment where it's kind of game over.
Yes, time to go, Archbishop is the front page of the Metro. You know, why was this re-looked at now, so many years after this man died, or indeed when the Archbishop first became aware of it in 2013? Do we know why?
It has been bubbling. This has been bubbling under the surface for a very, very long time. Obviously, the fact that this inquiry was even launched. These questions haven't, as Pippa rightly said, these questions have been haunting him for a while, and I think he hoped they'd go away. But as we've seen, is that these things never go away. And
the report was published last week, which is why it's sort of become more of an issue again now. Now, it is the case that Archbishops of Canterbury conventionally retire when they hit 70, and he's about a year, I think, off that. So he'd been expected to announce his retirement. They have a long retirement in the next few months anyway. He might find that ends up being expedited under pressure. His response so far seems to have been to just add to the apologies.
That's the problem. Well, it was quite a bullish statement
about clerical abuse, as he has done, you know, so far, and ride out the storm. But I don't think he helped himself. Unlikely that he's going to be able to.
Yeah, I don't think he helped himself with his statement today, which was essentially, "I'm going nowhere. You know, suck it up," which I think is, you know, not helpful. Yes, he apologised again, but you know, at the end of the day, he knew in 2013. He says. And the report says, well, that's not necessarily credible. We think you probably knew before then.
And these were hundreds of men, now men, then boys, children, impacted by this. And you know, with every sort of attempt to at its most extreme, cover up, but also potentially minimise what they went through. Well, rather, this is how they would interpret it, as minimising it by trying to sort of glaze over it and move on. Although, of course, he has called out in very strong terms the abuse that took place. Now,
but I think also there's no one out there defending him either. That's the problem. He has been very quick to condemn others very quickly within the church. I don't know if anyone heard the testimony of Giles Fraser, a priest, this morning on the Today programme, which was incredibly moving. About
he was a victim himself, but
not of this, but of abuse himself, and just said, look, you cannot reform if this is what you're sort of dragging along with you. So I think this is, you know, I think nip it in the bud, I'd say.
Interestingly, I mean, he will, you know, go down in history as the person who, you know, crowned a king and carried out the funeral service for a queen.
Yeah,
you know,
these things
given
are tough.
she was,
these are hard things to walk away from. It's one of the most prominent jobs in public life in Britain. But that doesn't mean you get a free pass.
And, you know, again, we go back to institutions who are accused, you know, be it Post Office or the blood inquiry. It's, you know, it's been the story of the last year, hasn't
Absolutely.
it? Absolutely. Let's go to news that is just broken. What is in the assisted dying bill, effectively? And what are the protections for those who are deeply concerned about this, of which there are no doubt many?
So this is a backbench bill, but because it came top of the ballot in this rather sort of arcane system that exists in Parliament, it's receiving the backing of the... it's a vote of conscience because it's on assisted dying, but it has received government support in terms of the drafting of the legislation to make sure... I mean, that's like conventional. It's not, they're not taking sides on it. And Kim Ledbetter, who is the MP that has put this forward, says it's the best possible legislation and suggests that it's going to be the strictest protections and safeguards in the world. And some of the things that the bill includes are that 2 independent doctors have to be satisfied that a person is eligible. That individual has to be terminally ill and expected to die within 6 months. And the application then has to be approved by a High Court judge. And crucially, and this is, I think, the first time we established this, is that the medicine has to be self-administered, which obviously raises questions about people's capacity towards the end of life and whether they can. And that the coercion of a patient, which is obviously what a lot of the critics of the legislation suggest, that it's like a slippery slope, that people could end up being encouraged down this route. It could be criminal. A coercion of a patient would be a criminal offence punished by up to 14 years in prison. So these are pretty tough safeguards, whether they're enough to convince
mental health
people.
and disabilities will be excluded from it, which is what the problem I think lots of people have seen in Canada, where this bill was introduced and then it's sort of been tacked on and tacked on and tacked on, and then eventually you've got the situation where actually suddenly the sort of justifications for ending one's life is is actually suddenly quite broad and open to abuse. I do think the people who are putting this forward, the MPs who are supporting it, I'm not sure they're going about it in the best possible way. So they've sort of published the summary of the bill today. We weren't allowed to see it before, deadline for the papers. It's just been published online. It does feel like they're trying to sort of ramrod it through, which I think is upsetting a few people. I think it's making people think, actually, do we really want to make this massive fundamental change in law without a much longer time to, A, scrutinise the bill, maybe, sort of put forward, different versions of the bill, see what goes forward. The quirk of the system being that, as Pippa said, it is a backbench bill, means that it has limited time in Parliament. But do we really think that actually for something this massive, perhaps...
So you're suggesting the government needs to adopt it and shape it for itself?
Very difficult when it's
very difficult to do when it's a vote of conscience. You've got cabinet ministers openly saying that they're not going to back it. Wes Streeting coming out and saying he's not sure the NHS has got the capacity to do this, which is one way of putting it. I think the Prime Minister has been talking about this on his trip. I'm not sure I can say what he's going to say because it's embargoed till 6 a.m. But he is not backing this definitively either way, and he is raising the concerns about it.
Yeah,
as well,
not backing it definitively because that's the instruction he's given his cabinet. But what we do know is that previously Keir Starmer has said that he would support legislation on assisted dying coming forward, and MP's been given the chance to have a free vote.
That does not mean he supports it.
No, and while he's instructed his cabinet not to sort of go out and campaign...
Something they've ignored, frankly.
It is the case that both Wes Streeting, who has subsequently suggested he's got concerns about the ability of the NHS to deal with sort of the palliative, thinks that the palliative care system isn't sufficient and therefore people might feel that this is their only option compared to palliative care, and Shabana Mahmood, the Justice Secretary. So the two departments, really, which are going to be most involved with this, if it comes through, Health and Justice, have both opposed it. The majority of the Cabinet, however, are expected to back it. There are a couple of really big names that are undecided, people like Rachel Reeves and Yvette Cooper and so on. And actually, I think they represent quite a large chunk of MPs. They reckon about 100 MPs are still, within the Labour Party, are still undecided as to which way they're going to go.
Even if it gets through the Commons, though, this is going to get shredded to pieces in the Lords.
Concerns about how fast legislation is going through, but if you look at the Telegraph, there's a sort of implied concern about how quickly somebody could...
The 21 days,
yes, 21 days.
From the first doctors, from the first sort of signing a piece of paper saying, I want to do this, you have to do that twice at various points. You have to have 2 doctors. Then it goes to a judge. But the scope is you could do it within 21 days, which, frankly, if you look at it from the other way, is that, look, the point of this is that if you're trying to end your life quickly because you're in an extreme amount of suffering and pain, obviously you need an expedited way of doing this. Otherwise, what's the point? Because, if it takes 6 months to do it, and you're already only allowed to you're only allowed to apply for it if you are 6 months, you have 6 months to live, 2 doctors say, then you're into a situation, well, what's the point?
And it must be said that some of its biggest supporters are people who either they themselves have a terminal illness or indeed have cared for a family member, often really just having the only option of going to Dignitas Clinic in Switzerland at the end and having cared for their family member throughout that period, and in most cases not being able to take that route in Switzerland. I think it's quite telling that some of the biggest advocates are those that have been through that experience themselves and see that actually this would be a much more humane way for their loved ones to end their life.
Just to say that the other concern is that this is the thin end of the wedge, and once it's on the statute book, it starts to get amended, and then you cannot.
Yeah. Controversial issues.
Very.
And lots more, no doubt, tomorrow on that. Lots more still to come on the programme. The Sun reporting that the Russian President Vladimir Putin was so close to firing nuclear warheads in 2022 that crisis meetings were being held over the fallout hitting the UK. Back with that.
I'm Stuart Ramsey, and I'm Sky's chief correspondent. Free wherever you get your news.
I'm Mark Stone, and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C. Sky News, get the full story first.
I'm Katie Spencer, and I'm Sky News' arts and entertainment correspondent.
I'm Lisa Dowd, and I'm one of Sky's Midlands correspondents. The reason I do this job is because you never know where it's going to lead.
Weeknights on Sky News.
This is your chance. Tell people. Welcome to the Politics Hub.
Our police force has apologised. If you want to find out about Grimsby, you come to the docks.
I'm live in Jerusalem. Are you not concerned that that could lead to all-out war?
Hello there, good evening. There are fears of an upsurge in violence. What's at stake here?
You are watching the press preview, a first look at the front pages as they arrive.
Jubilation in the streets, while some emotional.
This is a political victory for Prime Minister Modi and his Hindu Nationalist Party.
I'm Neville Lazarus, and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi. Companies like these are helping India in its trajectory to be a serious player in space exploration. Sky News, get the full story first.
Welcome to the world.
Our new podcast, starting now. It's very exciting. Every week, we'll be reporting from the world's trouble spots.
We get to hold those in positions of power accountable, and we get to ask the questions that the audience, the listeners, want to know about.
And that's why it is so important that people tune in, come along for the road, come along for the journey. It'll be fun.
I'm Alex Crawford, and I'm Sky's special correspondent based in Istanbul. We aim to be the best and the most trusted place for news.
The most significant day of this conflict.
They keep telling us that they want aid.
And this is what's left of it.
Why only in America? People want their country to work.
Just want a job in a normal life.
Why are these homes empty?
I want you to be honest with people.
That has happened within minutes.
Sky News, the full story first. Free wherever you get your news.
We arrive. A secret hospital hidden in the Myanmar jungle, treating the victims of this bloody war.
This is Myanmar today. Its military rulers don't want the world to see, but we have.
I fight for my own future. I fight for my generation's future.
This is an actual crime.
They don't care for that.
Myanmar army is only a couple of kilometers away. So this is a major humanitarian disaster.
Well, Well, welcome back. You are watching the press preview, joined once again by the political editors of The Sun and The Guardian, Harry Cole and Pippa Crerear. Again, to each of your papers, Harry starts with you. And your story, in fact, that Liz Truss spent the dying days of her... What do you call it in office?
Her doomed premiership.
Her doomed premiership, studying weather maps in case this happened. Tell us more.
Exactly. So cast your mind back to October 2022. Joe Biden appeared one day on television saying the world is as close as it's been since the Cuban Missile Crisis to a nuclear incident. Obviously, that set lots of hairs running. And it turns out there was some fairly horrifying US intelligence that was shared with allies, essentially, that Putin was considering using a tactical nuclear weapon on the battlefield of Ukraine or testing a much larger weapon in the Black Sea. And now this sent, obviously, the Western alliance into absolute freefall. We've picked at this a little bit. It sort of emerged a little bit at the time. I remember Ben Wallace, the then Defence Secretary, jetted over to DC for sort of crisis meetings, and no one was quite sure what's happened. Anyway, a few years later, we're now starting to really pick at what happened, and we're revealing tomorrow, in fact, revealing an updated book about Liz Truss. Who could it be? Which is out this week in all good bookshops. But essentially, after she'd resigned as Prime Minister, saying she was going to go, there's a sort of 5-6 day period where, she was bringing, she had to wait for the Tories to choose a new leader. And in this exact moment, this incredible crisis broke where the Americans were basically saying there's a 50-50 chance that Putin's going to let off a nuke. Now, we're not that far from Russia, or not that far from the Black Sea, or indeed Ukraine's 1,700 miles, really tops. And they were looking at the weather maps and actually looking at that, if he does this, the fallout from this is going to spread across Europe. Remember in Chernobyl, when, it reached Scotland, lots of sheep in Scotland were affected by that. And this would be basically, essentially, an attack on all of the West, attack on NATO. Quite how close we came, it seems. The fact that they were convening crisis meetings in Downing Street with the Prime Minister, looking at, essentially, the BBC weather map and saying, look, the wind is going this direction. If it goes that direction, we'll be all right. But if the wind changes, we're in real trouble here. And you just think, what a farce of that whole entire time was, with Liz Truss in there. Was that exactly the leader you'd want in that scenario? And B, quite how delicate the situation in Ukraine was. And now you can kind of understand the reticence from the Biden White House about escalating the situation in Ukraine. If this is what they actually thought he was going to do in 2022, you can see why they're being incredibly cautious now about using weapons, Western weapons, to strike Ukraine, because we could be back where we were 2 years ago.
Which Zelensky still wants of Biden, who himself is labelled up like Liz Truss is at the time.
Exactly.
And,
a terrifying sort of glimpse into... It reads like something out of a sort of Cold War novel. When we read about, when we report about North Korean troops being in, fighting in Ukraine, on basically North Korean troops fighting on the continent of Europe, and you just think, 10 years ago, this sounds like something out of Tom Clancy, and this is happening right now.
We only got 20 seconds left.
Sorry.
Should we just show the papers we were going to talk about?
Sorry.
One of which is that the Prime Minister's been speaking as he landed in Azerbaijan for the COP Climate Summit, saying that there's a big opportunity after the election of Donald Trump to get ahead in the race for green investment. And the second story, indeed, was about COP. COP agrees carbon trading deal despite fears that the US climate fight is on the back burner. The US standing firm for now, but we know what's coming. Pippa, you'll have to do that next time. I'm afraid I did it very quickly.
I'm going to be quiet now.
No, it was fascinating. Harry Cole, Pippa Crerear, thank you both very much indeed. See you at 11. Here's the weather now, and the next couple of days will bring good sunny spells to many, but starry skies overnight will lead to some frost and fog. There'll be a mainly dry, bright and frosty start tomorrow, but there will be a few showers near southeastern coasts and fog in places, some dense and freezing. Ireland and northern and western parts of the UK are most at risk. The morning looks like staying dry with long sunny spells for most. Early fog will be slow to clear. East Anglia and southeast England will be cloudier with a scattering of coastal showers. Touch cooler too, cold where fog lingers and breezy in the southeast. Pippa, Harry back for Sky News at 11 with details of the assisted dying bill being published in Parliament. We'll hear from both sides of the debate.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. A new start to Sunday. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Play Sky News.
From the Sky News Centre at 7.
Now that you're up to date, we can go into a bit more detail.
Things can change incredibly quickly.
Taken by surprise.
Have you ever known a moment like this in British politics before? Yes. Cheers.
We'll start with breaking news.
Let's get the latest on the ground.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better.